Well, good morning again, everybody. We're back with Chapter 3, and Chapter 3 in our public speaking textbook is all about helping us become a better listener. And so we're going to take a look at what it means to be a better listener and how that actually helps you become a better speaker today. And so if you have the chapter, you can follow along with me. If not, just have a listen and follow along on the PowerPoint slides. Now, research shows that most of us are not really good at listening. We're not very effective when it comes to listening. And according to tests by Dr. Lyman Stell of the University of Minnesota, here's what happens after the average person listens to a 10-minute oral presentation. After listening to a 10-minute presentation, how much information is understood and is actually retained? And what the study shows is that after 10 minutes, 50% of what the listener heard leaves their brain. They're gone. They're done. And what's even more interesting, 2 days later, listeners only remember about 25%. Now, this may be shocking to you, but personally, I think this is actually kind of a high percentage. Think about the last thing that you heard. Maybe the last time you heard your pastor speak. For instance, today is Tuesday that I'm actually recording this, and I'm thinking back to my pastor's message on Sunday, and I do remember the passage that he preached out of, but what about all the points? Can you remember everything that your pastor preached on Sunday? It's interesting how when we're not actively engaged and actively listening, how much information that we can actually lose when we don't listen correctly. So, we're not very good listeners when it comes down to it. And there's a difference because we've got listening skills and we've got hearing. And hearing and listening are two totally different things. Hearing is what your ears pick up, like the sound waves that are being transmitted by a speaker. Just the very fact that you can actually hear the speaker means that you are hearing the sound waves that are coming from his mouth. They're going through the air. They're tickling all the little bones and the things inside of your ears. You hear the speaker, but listening is different. Listening is when you actually begin to make sense out of what is being transmitted. So there's a definite difference between hearing and listening. It's funny. My wife sometimes, she'll say, "Do you hear me?" After she's asked me to do something a couple of times. And yes, I've heard her, but was I really listening to her? That's really what we ask. Are you listening to me? Are you making sense out of what I'm trying to say? Keith Davis put it like this. He said, "Hearing is with the ears, but listening is with the mind." And you think about that. We hear all sorts of things, but in order to listen, we have to be actively engaged. So we're going to take a few minutes today and look on what it means to listen effectively. Listening to material that is difficult at times, especially like during lectures or if you're listening to technical presentations, it's hard work. Let's just be honest. It's not easy. And so if you're going into situations where the information may be a little technical, maybe a little hard, you have to prepare yourself as thoroughly as like a runner would prepare for a race. I have a buddy who is totally into running, and maybe you are too, and he just ran a marathon. And just watching his progress over social media of how to run, how to taper, how to eat correctly, it's just amazing. And those same techniques can be used when we try to listen to other people speak. You literally have to prepare yourself physically. If you know you're going in to listen to something, you're going to want to make sure that you get plenty of sleep the night before. Maybe you want to wake up that morning and get a little exercise in, take a walk right before the speech, take a walk right before the lecture. You have to also prepare yourself not only physically but intellectually. For instance, if the subject matter of the speech is new or if it's complex, you may have to do a little bit of research or some background reading beforehand. And in doing that, the speech is going to be much easier for you to understand and much easier for you to comprehend and follow. So listening effectively, we have to physically prepare ourselves and we have to intellectually prepare ourselves, because listening is a choice and a chore. And I want you to think about that statement. It's a choice and a chore. Listening is not easy. Sometimes I think it's easier to do the speaking than it is to do the listening. So we've got to get it in our heads. To be a really good speaker, we need to be a good listener. That's going to help us out tremendously. So how are we going to listen effectively? First of all, we need to be willing to expend some energy. You see, when we're listening to things that are really complex, like complex material, you can't really expect to lean back and just kick back like you're at the movies, right? When you're at the movies, you go into the dark theater, you get in that nice, comfortable chair, you've got your soda, you got your 15-gallon bucket of popcorn sitting there that, if you're like me, you finish it before the movie credits even begin at the beginning. But you're just kind of in this passive situation. You're there to be entertained. You sit back and you just kind of soak it in. You don't have to do a lot of thinking. But to listen to complex material, you have to be alert. You have to be energetic. You have to give your total concentration to the speech. You have to keep your eyes on the speaker, and your ears have to be tuned in to the speaker's words. Your mind has to be geared to receive the message, because you have to listen and you have to analyze what speakers are saying. And you want to do some analysis in a very systematic way. You want to focus most of your attention on simply the key ideas that the speaker is giving. You want to focus in on those key ideas rather than all the extraneous details that surround those ideas. So you have to be listening analytically to figure out, especially if it's a speaker who is not very forthcoming with their main points, you may have to be doing a lot of systematic analytical listening to divine what the main points of the speech is. You also have to look if the speaker develops his or her their key ideas with support materials, such as like examples and stories and statistics. You want to pay attention to all of those. And one of the best analytical way of listening is simply to take notes, right? I mean, that kind of seems silly, but really to take notes is a great thing. So you want to take your notes. Taking notes is one of the best important tools for effective listening, and it has three distinct advantages. The first one is that, well, it gives you a written record of what the important points were, right? You're going to write down the main points of the speech. The second thing is it sharpens your ability to listen analytically, because you are engaged in a physical activity while the speaker is speaking. You are putting down the main points. You're analyzing what the speaker's saying. And the third thing is it's really a good way to keep your attention on the speaker's words, because you're actively engaged in your listening process. Your mind doesn't seem to wander quite as much as if you weren't taking notes. So taking notes during any speech, during any lecture, during any sermon, any presentation is a great way to help you focus and to listen effectively. And here's an option for you. This way is a good way to take notes. It's the 3-column method. And in the first column, what you were going to do is you're going to write down basically the gist of the speaker's main ideas. In the second column, you're going to jot down the support material that the speaker is using to develop the main ideas. And then in the third column, this is the one that you kind of write down your response. If you are one like me, you have those aha moments, or you have questions about what is being said, and you want to remember those questions to either A, ask the speaker after they're done, or if you want to go and do some research on your own, this is one of the methods. And now, look, this is not normally how you and I would approach a speech, right? Think about it. When you go listen to someone, or you're hearing a presentation, do you ever stop and think, well, now let me make 3 columns. I need to get the main idea, support material, and response. No, this is not natural. This is not the way we normally would listen, but think about it. If you're actively engaged in deciphering what the speaker is trying to say, you're going to pinpoint their main ideas. And then if you're listening to all the support material, and as we go through this course, you'll understand how important support material is, because if you don't support a fact, if you don't support a contention, well, then that contention really isn't valid. So you're going to write down all the support material, and then man, if you have an aha moment and you want to remember, I've got to research this, or I want to find out more information, let me ask the speaker. Then you can have that response column as well. This is a great option to listen effectively. You're going to do some analytical listening this way. But sometimes you're going to have speakers who basically speak like 100 mile an hour. And so this is an option B for you. If this is a situation you find yourself in and your speaker is speaking at a very fast pace and you can't hardly immediately distinguish between what their main points are and like what their sub points are, this system is going to work a little bit better. In the first column, you're going to write one note per line, as shown on this sheet on the left here. And later, as you analyze that sheet, it's going to look more like the example on the right. And so what you can do is you can take all the things you wrote down, use a highlighter to mark the key ideas, because after you've been able to process it for a little bit, you can really pinpoint what the main ideas were. And then take a red pen to circle items that you may want to follow up on. So this is more of a method for those who are a little bit faster paced, or maybe the speech is a little bit, well, not everybody's a perfect public speaker, so it's hard to kind of divine the points out of. Use this option. We have to be able to resist distractions when it comes to listening. And here's the truth. We are very distracted as a people. I mean, it doesn't take much for us, right? Just one tweet comes through, or one email, or we are thinking about what we're going to eat after this speech is done. There's so many distractions that we come across. So we have to be sure to fight against these distractions. And there's different types of distractions. The first is an auditory distraction. This is where you get distracted by people coughing. You know, we're going into the cold season. Well, actually here in Louisiana, even in the spring, we have allergies. So people go into coughing fits, or you hear someone whispering behind you. Maybe the air conditioner kicks on and it's like, 1,000 decibels loud. Maybe someone's in the next room and they've dropped a trash can, or there's another class in another room and they're laughing at something the professor said. There's all kind of auditory distractions that we have to push through and resist them. There's also visual distractions that we have to be careful of. You ever walked into a classroom and looked on the board, and even though the whiteboard or the chalkboard has been erased, there's remnants of what was there before? And you try to kind of decipher what was written on the board, or what's that funny face someone drew and half erased. There's all kind of visual distractions as well. Maybe someone who's sitting next to you is a pretty good-looking person, and you are intrigued. You're a single person. You're looking over and saying, hey, I like that. You have to be careful about the visual distractions as well. Maybe there's an appealing magazine on the table or a desk, or you just got, something like that new magazine that you've been waiting for, and it came in the mail and you've picked it up, but you don't want to look at it now because you want to listen effectively. But we can be visually distracted as well. There's physical distractions. Sometimes you're going to come into a speech or a class and you're going to have a headache. Or you're going to be the one with the stuffy nose and the cold and the allergies. Or maybe you walk in and your seat is simply too hard. You ever been in one of those seats before? They're terribly uncomfortable. Maybe the room the speech is being given in is too hot. It's too cold. There's all kind of physical distractions that go on. And then we've got our mental distractions, right? We've got lives. And when you go in to listen to speeches, you're coming in with your own set of issues, your own set of worries, your own set of preoccupations. And maybe it's not even negative. Maybe you're like me, and I am the biggest daydreamer ever. I can daydream all day long, and maybe that's a distraction for you. You have to push through them. You have to push through these distractions, because if you don't, you're going to miss the whole point of the speech or the presentation that you're listening to. And if you miss it, then what was the point to even go to it, right? What was the point of sitting through a 20-minute lecture or a 20-minute presentation or someone's speech if you're not going to benefit from it in some way? So resist these distractions. Another thing that you need to do, and look at this guy here, is you need to avoid fake listening. Now, this guy, if he was sitting in my class, I would think he was kind of paying attention to me. But is he really? some listeners are going to be looking directly at you as a speaker, and they're going to seem to be listening, but in reality, they're just pretending. So as a listener, we need to make sure we fight against that. We want to be actively engaged. Don't let your mind be far away. One of the bad things about fake listening is you're going to miss a lot of important information. And the second thing is, it can be a highly embarrassing situation if you are fake listening to someone and they think you're paying attention, and then they ask you a question and you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I have no idea. And we've all been there, right? Like the teacher calls on you and you're like, the answer's blue. And that wasn't near the answer because you weren't really paying attention. You were just faking. Remember this, listening is a choice and a chore. Listening is not easy. If you want to be a really good listener, you have to choose to be one. Another thing is you have to give every speaker a fair chance. Unfortunately, some people reject speakers because they have a terrible delivery, or perhaps they don't like what they're wearing that day. These are unfair. Some of the most important information comes from people who may not be the best at public speaking. They just don't have the skills or haven't developed them correctly to hold an audience's attention. And yet we don't give them a fair chance when what they have to say is so extremely important. Some listeners also do this. They don't control their emotions. And this happens like when a speaker gets up and the topic that they're talking about may be emotionally charged, or in the middle of their speech they say a phrase and it really just irks you as a listener, or they're making a point that may be controversial, and so listeners kind of begin to argue with the speaker inside of their head, and they begin to think of all these counter arguments that they're going to come back against this speaker. You just wait until that question and answer period, and I've got all these questions. I'm going to get that speaker. But if we don't control our emotions, think about how much of information we're gonna miss out on. Now, I think it's important for us to take notes and to think mentally about those things. But if they control it, we're going to miss a lot of what they have to say, the speaker has to say to us. So we have to control our emotions. A lot of times people will make controversial type statements to simply gain your attention, and then they will circle back around and show you that, hey, it wasn't as controversial as you thought. Whether that's a good tactic or a good ploy, I don't know. Maybe that's even up to you. But don't let people get your control of your emotions. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't convince yourself that the speaker's saying something that they are not saying. So you have to just be careful when it comes to controlling your emotions and listening effectively. Now, that's some pointers on how to listen effectively. So as a listener, you have some responsibilities, right? And the first responsibility that you have is to avoid rudeness. I want you to think about this. If you were in a classroom setting, or not even in a classroom, as you get your speeches done online, you will have an audience who is sitting in front of you. What if one of those people in your audience yawned, fell asleep in the middle of your speech? You're giving your presentation and they fall asleep. Or what if they did this? In the middle of your presentation, they opened a book and began to read. Well, you would totally be upset, right? You would be upset at your family or your friends because they're being rude. And we want to follow the golden rule of listening. Many people would never be so rude as to even dream as a friend in a conversation. Let's say you and a friend are having a conversation, and you would never just in the middle of a conversation just stop, pick up a book, or stop and scroll through Facebook and stop listening. You would never do that one-on-one, but some people believe that when you get into an audience setting, it's okay. Right, there's the speaker, there's 20 people in a room, and what if I start, scrolling on Facebook? That's not that big. They've got 19 other people. No, that is extremely rude to do. You want to do this. Listen unto others as you would have others listen unto you, right? I mean, the golden rule of listening there is taking the golden rule and putting it into speech terms. In other words, you're going to want to speak you're going to want to listen attentively and courteously, because when the situation is reversed, when you're up there speaking, you're going to want the audience to listen attentively and courteously as well. So take all those distractions. Be an active listener. Be engaged. Give that good feedback to the people who are speaking. And one thing you have to do is to reject electronic intrusion, okay? Look, you can see this girl here. There's a speaker up in the front of the classroom. She's on the phone. You've got to limit access to devices like cell phones. Put your iPods away. Oh, for goodness sake, if you're listening to someone, do not have your earphones in. I don't understand that. That's a new trend. And just coming into a classroom or just having your earphones in all the time, even though you claim you're not listening to music, it just speaks volume to the person who is speaking. They don't want to see that. It's rude. Don't use a laptop computer in a presentation unless you've talked to the speaker first. You may have really good reasons to have one out. I want to follow you. I want to type. I want to take notes. If the speaker's okay with it, then yeah, that's totally cool. But if you haven't cleared it before, don't use a laptop during a presentation as well. You make sure that you are not multitasking during a speech. Here's the truth. A lot of students claim that they're really good multitaskers. In other words, they're capable of using electronic devices. They can listen to the speaker at the same time. But these students are really overlooking two important issues. The first is this. When listeners avert their eyes and they perform basically non-listening activities, the speaker usually interprets the behavior as disrespectful or rejection. Now, if you remember from Chapter 2, part of our nervousness thing is, as speakers, we don't want to be rejected. That's part of our fear. But if someone gets on the phone, if someone gets on their computer and they're doing all these things, multitasking, it's comprehended by the speaker as being rejected, so we don't want to do that. Also, if you're trying to multitask and you're think of all the activities that you're trying to do, and you're trying to do all of them effectively. I'm trying to listen to the speaker. I'm trying to scroll through my device. I'm trying to do this. The study shows that there's no way you can fully comprehend everything that's going on at one time when you multitask. Now, there's times and places for multitasking, but when you're listening to a speech, that is not the time because your attention is divided. And you're going to miss main points, right? You're going to miss things. For example, Cornell University did this study, and they arranged for two groups of students to listen to the same lecture. And then they were going to take a test immediately after that lecture. Now, one group was allowed to listen to the lecture and to use their laptops to browse the internet during the lecture. But the other group was asked to keep their laptops closed. Now, at the end, remember they took that test, and when they were tested, the students with open laptops remembered significantly less information from the lecture, and they did poorly on the test compared to the people who had closed laptops. The bottom line is this: multitasking is rude, okay? It's rude and it's ineffective, so don't do it. Don't do it. Remember my famous line so far. Hopefully you're picking up on this. Listening is a choice and a chore. I'm not going to sit here and say that listening is easy. It's not. But to be a good listener, you have to choose to be a good listener. And once you make that choice, it is a chore to listen attentively, to listen correctly. You also want to do this as a responsible listener. You want to provide some encouragement, right? Encourage the speaker as much as possible by giving your full attention and letting your face show how interested you are, and try to be animated. The more encouragement a speaker receives, the better their delivery becomes. So if you're out there as a listener and the speaker's kind of, well, they're not necessarily the greatest speaker in the world, but you're giving them positive reinforcement. You're smiling, you're nodding. It builds their self-esteem as a speaker. It builds their confidence, and they become better speakers even in the course of the speech that they're giving. And so it's only going to help you out. So there is a payoff for doing this. There's a payoff for ourselves. The better the speaker, the easier it is to listen to them. And they become better speakers when you provide that encouragement. It's easier to listen to them then. And it's better to understand what they're trying to say and remember and to gain the knowledge of the things that they're giving us. So give some encouragement, a simple smile, a simple head nod. You're going to want to do that. Now, we're going to have a chance to evaluate some speeches, in both in the classroom as well as our career. You're going to have a chance from time to time to give a speaker some feedback. Now, this process is beneficial for you as well as a listener, as well as the one speaking, and you are going to get some, when it's your time to speak, you will also be benefited by the feedback that you receive. And so these evaluations that you give are going to help gain some insight into what works, what doesn't work during a speech making process. The speaker can use these suggestions to improve their speaking skills. There's tons of things that are going to help in these evaluations. So when you get a chance to evaluate someone, you want to make sure that you listen objectively. Keep an open mind, right? Especially if you have strong feelings about their topic that they're talking about. Also, you don't want to let yourself be swayed emotionally by the speaker's delivery or their appearance. You also want to take your notes, right? Jot down your observations throughout the speech. Otherwise, you could actually forget some of their key topics. You want to look for both positive and negative aspects of the speech, and here's the key: emphasize the positive. If you emphasize the positive, the speaker will continue doing what works well. Point out the negative so that he or she can improve on certain things. If you see them with their hands in their pockets and they're jingling the change in their pockets, you may want to just point that out. Hey, maybe take your hands and place them on the lectern or the podium beside your pockets. You have a tendency to jingle your change, and that is distracting. Give the positive comments first, okay? Always keep their morale from sagging. You want to lead in with the positive. Give them the good news, bad news approach. Start with the good things. Here's what you did well. You also want to couple your negative comments with positive alternatives, kind of such as what I talked about having your hands in your pockets and jingling the change. That is a negative, but give them an alternative. Hey, put your hands on the podium. That way you're not tempted to jingle your change. If you give them that alternative, you don't want to just say, hey, here's something wrong. Give them a way that you think that would help them to fix the negative thing. In most cases, you need to ignore nervousness, because remember from Chapter 2, everyone is nervous when we give speeches. And we also talked about how sometimes, and most of the time, a speaker's nervousness is not really perceived. Like if you think your hands are shaking uncontrollably, as a person who's listening to the speech, we may not pick up on that. But let's say that they got so jittery that they really begin to lose their place, or maybe they are a person who perspires quite a bit if they are nervous, and it's kind of obvious they've had to wipe their forehead a couple of times during their speech. Just ignore it. I mean, that's my best advice to you. Just ignore it unless you can give a really useful tip, okay? If you say, man, you looked really tense and you looked really scared, that's not helpful at all. But if you say things like, why don't you put your notes on the lectern so your trembling hands don't rustle the papers? Now, that's positive. So, you've got to be really careful when it comes to nervousness. You want to give helpful advice, not like, "Hey, dude, you were sweating like a pig." No, you don't want to say that. So make sure you're helpful, and if you can't be helpful, just ignore it. The person knows they were nervous, and that's only going to come with practice and experience to help them become less nervous. Another thing you want to do is be specific. It's not really useful for a speaker to hear generalized comments like, "You did great," or "Your delivery was not really good." Those are too generic. Be as specific as possible. Instead of saying, "Man, you need to really improve your eye contact," say something like, "You looked at the floor quite a bit." Maybe pick up your eyes and engage your audience, looking them straight into the eyes. Now, if you're on the other side of this, instead of giving an evaluation, what if you're the one receiving the evaluation? Well, here's some tips for you. The first thing is this: don't be defensive. Try to understand the criticism that's given to you. Try to consider its merits. Don't argue, don't counterattack, and don't try to justify the things. You may not even know that you're doing something incorrectly or something that's distracting. So don't be defensive. And if you're not quite sure what they're talking about, go back and get some clarification on what the evaluator was saying. If they make a comment and you don't understand it, just ask them to explain it and do it in a very non-defensive way, okay? Don't get defensive. You also want to strive for improvement. In your next speech, here's what I encourage you. After you've been evaluated, take the evaluations and try to make the corrections in the problem areas. You always want to become better, and this class is a great way to do that. We're in a safe environment here. Strive for improvement. None of us are going to be perfect. Even me, as you're listening to me, I've made mistakes even as I've talked on this recording. We're going to get better, and the goal is improvement. The goal is better engagement. The goal is to get the information and the things that we're passionate about over to the people who are listening. But remember, listening is a choice and a chore. You have to choose to be a good listener. And when you choose, it's not easy. But we can do it. You can become a better listener. And when you become a better listener, you in turn will become a better public speaker.